JJK is back. Not in the way any of us expected, not in a Heian-era prequel, and not in a Gojo standalone story, but still, JJK is back. See, we've all heard for about a week or so now that Gege Akutami was coming back with a manga that he himself wasn't drawing, but still, rather surprisingly, after the explosive end of JJK and Gege's fading into obscurity, in what feels like less than a year, Gege Akutami was returning to the manga space with a story called Mojuro that was being drawn by a manga artist by the name of Yuji Iwasaki, the mangaka behind Cypher Academy, a story I'm sure none of you have read. However, Twitter absolutely blew up last night when it was revealed that in an interview, Gege Akutami talked about how Mojuro was not only going to be his foray back into the manga world, but also that Mojuro was going to be a Jujutsu Kaisen spin-off. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, it is not Gojover. Put the shackles back on because JJK is back. But how long is this story going to be? When does it officially come out? What is it going to cover? Who are the main characters? Is it in JJK's universe? Is it in the future? Is it in a parallel universe? Well, today we're going to be answering all those questions and more because today we are talking a JJK spin-off has been confirmed. But before we get to confirming anything, ladies and gentlemen, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for one additional Nick video a week, guys, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. We're on to the one-on-one fight. Oh my god, JJK is back. What do we know, Nick? Give us all of the information. Well, we're gonna get into all the information that I currently know about Mojuro, which is a lot, considering the fact that I've read the majority of the first chapter. But let's start this video off in the way that we tend to start these kinds of videos off, which is by answering the easy questions. What is Mojuro? Oh yeah, it's important to note here before we get into the meat of Mojuro, Mojuro actually isn't going to be the only JJK spin-off story. More on that later. Yep, we're getting a whole JJK verse written by different authors. Anyways, what is Mojuro? Well, like we've already established multiple times, Mojuro is a JJK spin-off, which was confirmed in this interview that I'll read to you right now from Gege Akutami. See, Gege released a press statement that has since been translated into English that said, "Hello, it's Akutami. It's been a while. While serializing Jujutsu Kaisen, I received several offers for spin-offs written by others. However, because manga is a medium where things can easily get out of my control, I was afraid of the title spreading in ways I couldn't manage. So at the time, I couldn't accept any of those offers. But when this particular offer came, I thought about how it might expand the main story, delve deeper into its setting, or even shift eras entirely. And I realized that if it were set in a parallel line, it could open the door to many different projects. This became the spark that gave rise to Mojuro, which originally didn't even have a single concrete idea, and after numerous planning meetings, it finally came to life. This will be a short-term serialization, about half a year if it doesn't get axed, collected in roughly 3 volumes. The artist is the incredibly talented Yuji Iwasaki sensei. He's amazing, his drawings are superb. Truly, I'd be very happy if you enjoy Mojuro as a new entry point into the world of Jujutsu. Now, there are a lot of things to break down in that relatively short press statement. 1, obviously, the big takeaway is that Mojuro exists in the world of JJK. And 2, it appears as though that now that Gege Akutami is separated from physically drawing JJK, a story that not only put a massive strain on his physical, but also his mental health, that he's had some time to step away and reflect and realize that he now has the mental capacity, the emotional capacity, and the time to allow other people to expand his universe. But this doesn't mean that Gege Akutami isn't involved in any of these spin-offs. See, much in the same way that the Naruto universe has been expanded upon multiple times through the medium of light novels, it appears as though while Gege may not be the one actually physically penning these chapters, he does state that he was involved in numerous planning meetings. And after those numerous planning meetings, Mojuro came to light. Now this means most likely how Masashi Kishimoto is a co-writer on all Naruto light novels, Gege Akutami is going to fill a co-writer role on all of these spin-off mangas. But what does that co-writer role truly mean? Well, we can't say 100%. If I'm being entirely real with you, it's probably Yuji Iwasaki making the majority of the plot decisions. It's not just Gege saying, I want this and that and this and that, and I want you to draw it, because that's not usually how a new illustrator and existing IP relationship works. If we look at Boruto and Naruto, we know that Kishimoto is slightly involved in the creation of Boruto. But while Ikimoto was listed as just the illustrator in the beginning days of Boruto, with Masashi Kishimoto being involved with all storyboarding and plot, it's actually been revealed in the last couple of months that Ikimoto is actually the one who's been responsible for all of the plot decisions in Boruto, with Kishimoto coming out and saying that, well, in the beginning, him and Ikimoto laid out a grand plan for what Boruto was going to accomplish plot-wise, that Ikimoto has actually made a ton of changes to that plot, and Masashi Masashi Kishimoto is the first person who gets to read Boruto every single month, and he's excited to figure out what Ikimoto has done with the story. And I believe this is probably exactly what's going on with Gege Akutami and Yuji Iwasaka. There's probably some major plot points that Gege wanted Yuji to hit. However, how Yuji gets to those individual plot points is probably entirely up to Yuji, who is obviously very appropriately named for this project. Now, the other big takeaway here is that Mojuro is going to be a short-term serialization. That is to say that Mojuro is not planned to be a mega shonen like JJK. It's supposed to be able to be a story that can be wrapped up in about 6 months. And Gege doubled down on the sentiment when he said that the entirety of the story should be self-contained within 3 volumes. Now, for those of you who don't know, a volume is usually about 10 chapters. Usually. It can be variable. However, if Gege is saying that the entirety of the serialization of this story should only take about 6 months, and we're expecting somewhere in the region of 30 chapters, that would be 30 weeks, which is about half a year. A little bit over half a year, but still. So this is not going to be a long story. In fact, the entirety of the story is going to be less than half as long as the Culling Game arc. But should you be sad about that? The fact that we're only going to get additional JJK content for 30 weeks? No. See, another important thing that was said in this press release was that Gege stated that when this project came in, it opened his mind to the realization that many new spin-off projects could exist in the JJK universe, whether they exist in different eras, different places, or different universes. All of them would be great individual ways that the JJK universe could be expanded upon. And while Mojuro, because it's coming out September 8th officially, has definitely dominated the talking sphere of JJK spin-offs, it's not even the only confirmed JJK spin-off. See, because not only are we getting JJK spin-off mangas like Mojuro, we're also getting JJK spin-off novels. You know, like Naruto's light novels. And in fact, one of these novels has already been confirmed, and it's going to be written by a famous Japanese horror novelist and the mangaka behind the slightly horror manga Diner, which I'm sure none of you have read, Yumaaki Hirayama. Now, as Yumaaki Hirayama usually focuses on either mystery or horror novels, it's most likely that we're going to be getting some kind of incredibly dark JJK novel from him, either focusing on the horrors of living in a world where cursed spirits that are invisible to the human eye can snap your neck whenever they want, or possibly focusing in on a talking point that's presented itself in Mojuro's first chapter already, which is Japanese people being abducted to be used as power sources because of their cursed energy aptitude. However, for the moment, considering the fact that this novel hasn't leaked all over Twitter, I can't necessarily say what it's going to be about, but I can talk about what Mojuro is going to be about because, like I said, it's already leaked all over Twitter. Now, the reason that we're not currently doing a first chapter breakdown is because, one, I need to drop off Dorothy at the airport a little bit later today to fly to Hawaii to take care of her sickly grandfather, and two, because the leaks are not good. They're not translated. There's a bunch of missing pages. They seemingly have all been leaked in the wrong order, and therefore, I don't want to break down this chapter with like 8 missing pages somewhere out in the matrix. Even after reading the 48 out of 56 total pages that should exist, I don't feel as though I understand what's going on in chapter 1. There's 8 missing pages, the translations aren't good, and therefore I feel like I can't give you the best possible experience of breaking down the chapter if I don't understand what I'm talking about. However, I can give you a pretty good idea of what this story is about. And therefore we can get back to the question that I asked at the beginning of this video and then simply did not answer. What is Mojuro? This is what happens when I don't have a script, guys. I'm freeballing this entire video. Well, in Gege Akutami's press release, he did talk about how the JJK world could now be open to all kinds of spin-off stories, including stories that run in parallel universes. I don't think that's what Mojuro is. I believe Mojuro is a JJK spin-off story that does take place in the same original universe as JJK. However, it is about 70 years in the future. Now, in JJK's original timeline, it is 2018. That's because that's when the manga began serializing, and then the manga stayed in 2018. There's no time skip. However, the beginning of Mojuro introduces the fact that it is now 2086. So about 68 years after the beginning of JJK's first chapter. Now, 68 years isn't that long, especially when you consider the fact that we already get a pretty crazy time skip at the end of JJK. See, because in the end of JJK, either in the additional content given to us by the last volume or just in the final chapters, I do not remember which. I believe it might have been additional content. We took a massive step forward in terms of time so we could see how Yuta and Maki and I guess Panda's stories ended. See, well, in this time skip, we technically don't see Yuta or Maki. We are told that Yuta takes over the Gojo clan, which makes sense because Yuta is a far distant relative of Gojo. He descends from the Fujiwara, Gojo descends from the the Sujiwara or something like that. And while their families did separate hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, they are still distantly related. And therefore, Yuta, as a distant relative of the Gojo clan, kind of like the Uzumaki to the Senju, took over the Gojo clan because Gojo was obviously gone. And the Gojo clan had no other strong members that would be able to assume a head of the clan role. I mean, think about how many other Gojo clansmen we've ever been introduced to. The number is literally 0. In fact, it was so bad that a lot of people believed that Gojo was the entirety of the Gojo clan, which he was not. He was just the only important one. Anyways, we took this massive step forward in the timeline, technically to get an eye on Panda, who after the destruction of his heart started to break down over the years, until eventually he was locked away in the Gojo family cursed tool vault. And while Panda had begun to kind of break down over the years, occasionally he was able to throw out a couple of quips. A couple of quips that we see him throw at Yuta and Maki's grandchildren, a boy and a girl, whose names were actually never given in JJK, but we learn in Mojuro: Tsurugi and Yuka. Tsurugi is the boy, Yuka is the girl. I think Tsurugi's older. Now, this flash forward time skip becomes all the more appropriate when you consider the fact of what Mojuro is about and who the main characters are. And it kind of makes you wonder as to whether or not Gege knew that Mojuro was going to be coming out all the way back when he released the last volume of JJK. The last volume that had the additional pages that focused on Nobara, Yuji, Panda, and Sukuna. Because not only did this additional content tease at a massive time skip, but it also introduced the two main characters of Mojuro, Yuka and Tsurugi. And it also kind of leads into the beginning of Mojuro. See, because while the first couple of color pages of Mojuro are something like we've never seen in JJK, I mean, a literal alien ship beams up next to Earth, and we see that within this alien ship, there are 3 aliens. The first and most prominent of which is the alien that's been shown time and time again on all of the color art that's been coming out for Mojuro, the alien that's holding the Earth in his hand, who has a third eye. However, he's got a band-aid over his third eye so nobody sees it. Now, we learned from a conversation between these 3 aliens that while America is the strongest country on Earth, shout out to us, apparently, thanks Japan, that America has delegated all kind of extraterrestrial relations to Japan. On top of that, the aliens believe Japan is the best place to go to because Japanese people have a power similar to that of the aliens, which they call Jujutsu. And therefore, it's revealed that cursed energy and Jujutsu might have some kind of extraterrestrial origins, or that it might just be a power that pops up on different planets. Now, this is really cool because 1, it expands the JJK universe far beyond the globe and far beyond Japan, and 2, because it could possibly give us some hints towards how cursed energy was created, something that I've actually been talking about recently. Because while we know that cursed energy has existed since the Heian era, has it always been a part of humanity? And if it's always been a part of humanity, has it only always been a part of Japan? These are all big possible questions that could be answered with Mojuro. Anyways, regardless of the fact that the beginning of Mojuro has a fantastical beginning that we never would have imagined for the JJK universe, when we do step down to Earth, we are introduced to a young Tsurugi and a young Yuka, who in some capacity or another live with their grandparents, Yuta and Maki. However, unfortunately, don't hold your breath for any badass 80-year-old Yuta fighting against aliens or anything like that, because while we do see Yuta and we do see Maki, both of them kick the bucket like 6 pages in. But Yuka and Tsurugi are entrusted with something from Yuta with massive importance, and that is Rika's ring. So while we may be 70 years in the future and aliens have now popped down to Earth to try and figure out what's going on with Jujutsu, not only is the power system going to be relatively the same, but we also might see powers from 70 years ago, like Rika. And if we're being entirely real with ourselves, Tsurugi and Yuka are kind of just analogs of Maki and Yuta. Yuka trains her body and her martial arts to be as powerful as possible so she can get the ring back from Tsurugi. As while Yuta didn't trust Rika's ring to Yuka when she was young, powers that be of the Gojo clan, maybe Yuka's mother, decided that A, she was too mischievous to have this cursed object that belonged in the Gojo family vault, and B, that she probably wouldn't be able to control it because she was losing all energy and possibly all of her cursed energy after Yuta and Maki died. Like, she was so depressed and dejected by her grandparents' deaths that she was losing her fervor for strength, which seems interesting because it's kind of against everything we think of how the power system works in JJK. One would assume that the sadder Yuka was about the death of Yuta and Maki, the more powerful she would get because she would be creating more cursed energy. But anyways, because Yuka's star was dimming, the Gojo family believed that Tsurugi should hold on to Rika's ring. But because this Yuka wants to get as powerful as possible, so we see her training in martial arts. Then there's a bunch of missed pages and poor translations, and we get to them both being fully grown, I believe. And Tsurugi is basically just Yuta. He walks around with with a katana that he channels all of his powers through. So if you're looking for the continuation of Maki and Yuta's story, boy oh boy is Mojuro gonna be that, with some also really well designed and kind of cool aliens. But what's gonna be the overarching problem of Mojuro? Well, something that was actually set up in JJK that was never paid off. See, rather interestingly, I believe one of the reasons that Gege Akutami is so incensed to do spin-off stories of JJK is so we can address some of those lingering plot points that everyone never stops talking about. Because wouldn't you know it, the main problem that's introduced in chapter 1 of Mojuro is the fact that Japanese people are being abducted for their cursed energy. A problem that was introduced in the Culling Game arc when the American military dropped down into the Culling Games and abducted a couple of Japanese sorcerers, which was just kind of swept under the rug in the last couple of chapters of JJK. As Maki said, her and a couple of other sorcerers were going to have to go to America to try and get the kidnapped sorcerers back. A problem that all began when Kenjaku literally went to the White House, killed the majority of the Secret Service, and cornered the American president by showing off the ridiculous power of cursed energy, and was like, you want some of this? Well, we only have it in Japan. And then they never really paid off that plot line ever. However, it appears as though the Gege is going to use other authors' works to pay off those plot lines. Because what I could glean from the rough translations of this first chapter, Yuka, Tsurugi, and the main alien with 3 eyes are going to be on some kind of mission to break down the criminal elements that are abducting Japanese people and using them as energy sources. And that realization does shine some lights on what these other spin-offs are going to try to accomplish. See, because there's only so many addendums Gege could make to the ending of JJK. He already released a bunch of additional content when he released his last volume that gave a more satisfying ending to a couple of characters. However, if there's a bunch of spin-off novels and manga that are all canon to the main universe, Gege now has the ability to address each and every single one of the haters. He can make a spin-off manga about the Heian era because everyone complains about not seeing enough of the Heian era. He's making a manga in Mojuro to address what Kenjaku was trying to accomplish by telling the American government that cursed energy is the most powerful power source on Earth, and his horror mystery novel that's already in works could possibly be about Kenjaku being brought back to life by Takaba. The possibilities are now literally endless for Gege, and it appears as though the potential content for Jujutsu Kaisen fans is also potentially limitless. It is going to become so much more than just a story. It is about to become a universe. And if you can't see that as good news, well then, I don't know, unsubscribe. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. What do you think about this update that JJK is getting a bunch of updates? Are you timid? Are you excited? Are you trying to curb your expectations? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Full Mojuro Chapter 1 breakdown probably tomorrow if the leaks get better, but we'll have to see.